Hi, this is Dayton Ward, and you're listening to Beyond Trek Podcast.
Red alert.
I don't know what level of freedom you have to discuss plot points from the new novel, but because it hasn't come out yet, obviously none of us have read it, so there's going to be some questions that may tiptoe along the line. I don't know what you're uncomfortable saying or anything like that, so I just want to kind of get like
you can ask anything you want. I will.
Okay.
I will choose not to answer if I think it's. I don't mean not to be difficult or anything. I don't want to spoil anything for anybody who hasn't.
Perfect.
Right. So,
and I
don't want to spoil anything for you guys either.
I have a follow-up question to that, but first, I want to thank the listeners. Welcome to Beyond Trek Podcast. We are on episode 202 today. If you watched the Noah episode, that's probably a spoiler because this episode's going to come out first, because tomorrow is release day for the first in the trilogy of possibly the last bit of the Litverse. I'm Dag. Renzo and Jay are in the house with me, and we have author Dayton Ward hanging out to talk about the release of book 1 in the Coda trilogy, Moments Asunder. Dayton, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. This is all David Mack's fault.
Yes. Well, in large part, yes.
Glad we're in agreement. I tweeted at him, and I was like, hey, let's talk about it. And he's like, cool, I don't want to spoil anything from book 1, so here's Dayton. I was like, oh, okay, I'll just talk to all three of you then. Awesome. Worst day ever.
Here's the bus.
So as you may have picked up, we're going to have a special interview with all three authors coming up over the course of the next couple months.
Hey.
Boy, that ought to be fun trying to coordinate time zones.
Well, at first, when David pitched it to me, I thought he was talking about, like, get all three of you in the same call, and I was like, how do you get 6 people to arrange, like, for 2 hours at any length of time at the same time? It's impossible.
Time zones are hard.
Well, the difficulty level gets, higher when we factor in Jim, because he's over in the UK.
That kills it right there.
Yeah.
We already have hard enough time. I'm on the East Coast, Dag's on the West Coast, so we literally have 2 ends of the U.S. we're trying to schedule, because a good evening time for me, he's just getting off work probably. So yeah, you're right. And those UK folks, we would have to be like, Dag, we're talking 8 a.m. for you, which is close to bedtime out there. So it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
It is.
You have to maybe on a weekend or something.
I actually have a trivia show slated with those UK folks, and I have to get up arse early just to be in it. So yay!
Yeah.
Dayton, you have over 41 credits to your name for Trek literature. You have a term named after you about being warded. Like if you've written for 3 of the different what are those Renzo, you know what they are.
You mean the wardie.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, to start off, that's an unofficial honor. So it was it has to do with the Strange New Worlds writing contests that took place during the late 90s and early 2000s. And under the rules of that contest, you were only eligible to submit if you were a non-professional writer, meaning that you had fewer than 3 professional writing credits, so short stories or 1 novel. So you couldn't, if you exceeded that, then you were not eligible to enter the contest. So I entered the first contest having never sold anything to anyone, and I won a berth in that first anthology, and then I repeated the second and third year. So I essentially rendered myself ineligible to enter the contest. And so Ted, a friend of ours, I can never say his real name properly, so I'll use his pen name, T.G. Theodore, who is also a Strange New Worlds winner, coined that term, wardie, for anybody who got 3 Strange New Worlds story wins and got knocked out of the competition.
I just think that's a really cool bit of trivia for the listeners who may not have paid so much attention to what was happening in that competition.
It was way back in the before time, when the world was still black and white.
Yeah, and then they invented color, and it was largely regarded as the second worst idea in creation.
How long does it take to prepare for something like that, just for the contest? And what was it that you wrote for that? Did you just make up a story?
Essentially, yeah. I mean, they announced the contest in, I want to say, either the late spring or very early summer of 1997. And I just dated myself. So there we go. I started to date myself. It gets even worse than that. So I wrote a story, and I don't remember how long it took, probably a month or so before I submitted it. And then I didn't hear anything about it until they announced the winners in November of 97, somewhere in that neighborhood, either October or November. I don't remember exactly now. And then the book came out the following June in bookstores. So just as far as the degree of preparation, it was a short story. It was 7,500 words, I think, is the max limit for those things. And I probably wrote it and edited over the course of a month or more before submitting it. And back in those days, submitting it was you literally printed out a copy and put it in an envelope and mailed it. Whereas now today everything's done electronically.
Right.
The old-fashioned days, printing, envelope, putting postage on it.
Yeah.
So you seem to have a frequent writing partner for a lot of the stories they wrote, especially in the early days and the SCE days. You wrote a lot with Kevin Dillmore, right? And as a pair, you guys wrote a couple of my favorite of the Star Trek novels in the whole Litverse. You wrote the Time to Sew, etc. And those are fantastic ones. What made you decide to work so well, or what made him such a good partner for you to work with? Like, how did that relationship work out, like, as a writing partner, it seems like?
Well, I mean, first of all, we were friends before we started to write together. But we became friends because of the Strange New Worlds contest. That first year that I won the contest, he was writing on a freelance basis for the old Star Trek Communicator magazine.
Got a few of those.
Right. And so he got the assignment, or he asked for the assignment, to interview that first crop of Strange New Worlds winners. There were 18 of us in that first book. And he sent out emails to people with the questions that he had prepared. And somehow he, for whatever reason, I don't think he ever really explained why, because things could have turned out so differently. Rather than email me the questions, he found out that we lived about 45 minutes from each other. So he said, "Hey, how about we meet in the middle for a beer, and I'll just ask you the questions." He's that kind of guy. He can make anybody. He could be a friend to anybody. So we ended up doing the interview, but when we sat there and shot the breeze for another hour or two, and then we started hanging out, doing stuff together, and our wives were very excited because we had a playmate finally to do with the stuff, the nerdy stuff. And that was 97, 98. So we've been friends ever since. And so the writing part kind of came naturally. We actually teamed up to do a magazine article for Star Trek Communicator first, and then it just blossomed into writing a couple of novellas for the SCE series, if you've ever read any of those.
Absolutely.
Starfleet Corps of Engineers. And then it kind of snowballed out of control from there. I mean, we're still writing together. We just recently finished a story that we sent to an anthology for publication next year.
I think that's so great. I love the idea of just kicking back and spitballing ideas about, what if these people were in this situation? How would they get into it? How would they get out of it? And I just think that, I definitely relate to that, and I think that's awesome.
We just did it this weekend. We just brainstormed a couple of ideas to pitch to a particular editor, and we have hopes and dreams of doing particular things, Star Trek and otherwise. We don't write as many novels as we used to together. I think the last one we did together was for the Legacies trilogy back in 2016. But we've discovered that we really dig doing different types of short stories. So in the past couple of years, I think we've done a half a dozen for different types of anthologies. One was a space western. One is like an old school pulp fiction adventure tales type anthology. One was a horror anthology set in the 80s in a movie theater, because that was what the theme of the entire anthology was. Movies, 80s movieplex. So we just been having fun with it. We make ourselves laugh, and then if anybody else comes along and laughs, then it's gravy. See?
Yeah. No, you guys, you in particular, I think have gone and used some of the most creative choices for characters in some of your short stories. Like in Almost But Not Quite, you took Belmore and Luxley and added them to the stories of Tuvok and Tom Paris in like the United States and their time travel shenanigans, right? Like that's a real clever like taking of a couple characters from Deep Space Nine and dropping them into the Voyager situation just because they're back on Earth in the time travel, right? Like it's very impressive some of the ideas that you guys came up with, or that you came up with in that case.
Thank you. I mean, I chances are good that I may have bounced. I mean, a chance it's probably as it's probably right more often than not that I will bounce ideas off him, even if he and I are not working together on a project. I still use him as my sounding board. I still use him as my principal. Hey, does this idea suck, or do you think I can actually do something with it? So yeah, even if we're not collaborating, he's still collaborating with me. A lot of chicken wings, a lot of beer. So.
Yeah.
Oh, chicken wings and beer. Now I want some chicken wings. So whenever I would read a Star Trek book, and I have to admit it's been a long while since I read a Star Trek book, but when I would read any of the books, what made it easy for me was knowing the characters, and if there were different characters written in that, of course, had never been in any series or movie, I would play the scenes in my head with the locations of the characters. It was kind of like watching a movie in your head sort of thing. So when you're writing these stories in these books, do you find that Star Trek is easier because you know the characters, you can hear their voices in your head, you know how they act, how they respond, as opposed to just a novel that's about something else? Is Star Trek easier to write for because you're more familiar with the characters and how they're played, what they do, what their motivations are, et cetera, et cetera?
I don't know that writing Star Trek or any kind of tie-in fiction is easier or harder than writing original fiction. They are challenging for different reasons.
Okay.
When it comes to writing something like Star Trek or Star Wars or any of these other properties that spin off novels, a lot of the world building is done for you. A lot of the backstory is established for you. Even in a lot of cases, the characters are established for you. So your job is to go in there and do something interesting with them. And depending on the wants and desires of the property holder, how much you can play with them and what condition you can leave them in when you put them back in the box. So that's the challenge. The challenge is to work within that perimeter that has been established by the property and not violate the canon, not violate, stories that you've watched on TV, and then depending on the nature of the project, other books that have been written. And then doing all of that while trying to come up with something new and interesting for these characters to do. And it's a sliding scale of difficulty based on the longevity of the particular series. But at the same time, my familiarity with the characters is also on a similar scale. I mean, I'm an original series fan from way back when, like the 70s. So my familiarity with Kirk and the gang is I believe it's pretty good. And then it's just on a scale from there. I'm next gen DS9 all the way down. So I know those voices. I know those voices and those mannerisms.
Yeah.
I can close my eyes, and I know how Kirk's going to sound when he's uptight. I know he's going to sound when he's mad. When he's ready to take the bull by the horns. I just know how he's going to react. It's almost, you can almost predict the words that are going to come out of his mouth like you would if you were watching a rerun. That's helpful. That helps with the characterizations. The challenge again is to just try to find something new and different that hasn't been done before, with these characters, which is a tall order for characters that have had stories told about them for 50 plus years.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thousands of stories. It's challenging.
Yeah.
So you
There's
happen
a
to
follow-up.
hit.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Ramsey.
You happen to hit upon something that I'm actually really interested in knowing more about, right? The verisimilitude between different works, right? You just mentioned how you have to make sure you don't contradict other stories and other people's canons that they've worked on, right? What kind of effort did you go through when you were writing, like, A Time to Harvest, to make sure that you didn't conflict with something from A Time to Be Born or something that was being written later on in the series, like A Time to Kill or something, or in any of the works, right? Or even now with Coda series, right? What kind of research are you doing to make sure that what you write doesn't smush somebody else's canon that they had written in their story?
Well, when it comes to something like the Time 2 books, and especially the Coda books, the authors communicate with each other. We all are in communication with each other, and we're playing off each other. We're setting stuff up for somebody in a later book, or we're playing off something that somebody set up for the book in a book ahead of us. And plus, there's the editor. We have the editor at Pocket Books or at Simon & Schuster, who is acting more or less the way a showrunner would work in a writer's room on a television show. They're overseeing the big picture. They keep all the trains on their respective tracks. And so they're reading all the manuscripts, and they're making sure that, we killed off that security guard in book 4, so he can't pop up in book 7. That kind of thing. and so much more. I mean, I'm not just diminishing the role of the editor. They are a vital part of this process. So in the case of Coda, we probably leveled up the level of communication that we normally do for these collaborative efforts, because so much seemed, at least in our minds, to be at stake. We were in constant communication throughout the process. We broke the story together, all 3 books. We worked out which beats were going to be in which book. We worked out which characters were going to be represented in which book, and how the story was going to flow through each book, and set up, what was I going to do in book 1 that would set up book 2, and what was Jim going to do that would set up Dave in book 3. And, we didn't turn anything in to an editor until we were all happy with the outlines for all 3 books. And then we presented the entire package to our editors at Simon & Schuster, and they edited the entire trilogy of outlines together. And then we all took our notes to our corners and we figured everything out. And then we went to our corners and wrote the manuscripts, and we kept talking back and forth. And hey, I've got this idea. We'd hash it out to make sure everybody was on board. Or, hey, the idea I thought was awesome really sucks. We need to go back and rethink this. Or I forgot about a plot hole from another episode, or that kind of thing. It was very collaborative from start to finish. I mean, almost literally to the point the first book got printed. We were all weighing in on something.
I think that's
there
beautiful.
was Rinda really asked the question I was going to ask, but then you brought up something we're on the same wavelength, Rinda. I don't know how we do it, but there was another part I wanted to expand on. When you're talking about doing a book series like this, Star Trek Coda, you have the other authors. You guys are working together to make sure that you're not tripping over or canceling out something that someone else did. Kind of like what happened in the Star Wars sequel trilogy. It was basically the guy that did the 8th movie acted like the 7th didn't even happen. And then the 9th one had to try to fix other stuff. So it was a disaster. So when you're trying not to step over each other, I know that the books have to follow the canon. The TV shows and movies don't have to follow anything in the books. So let's go back even further. You have all these books, and you have to assume that the number of people that have watched episodes and movies Star Trek will be a lot higher than ones who have read any books. And we still have some trouble with over 800 episodes trying to keep the canon all consistent. There are mistakes, there are mess ups here and there, but for the books, how do you even begin to have a knowledge of all these books? Because it sounds like in the movies and shows you try to maintain canon there. The books are also trying to do that, but how do you do that when you don't have an episode, or you don't have a rewatch you can do of all the episodes and movies? You've got hundreds of books that were out there about Star Trek. So how do you even begin to know that, well, this one Deep Space Nine novel that was released in 1998, we can't do this because they did that? How do you even handle that?
There's no way to read everything and remember everything. That's just impossible.
Right.
So when it came down to Coda, we started gathering our thoughts about what we wanted the series to do and how we wanted to showcase, sets of characters. And then once we had a rough idea of what we wanted to include, we started digging in a little bit on, all right, what's the status of these characters in the books? Where were they last seen? What were they last seen doing? What's their, where are they? And they're all over the map. If you've been reading the books, you know that, they're all over the place. Some storylines were in flux, or still in, or could be described as being in flux. Others had wound down to a point where we could decide, do we want to try to include them? Is what's still on the table relevant to the story we need to tell in these 3 books? Because there's a lot of work to do in these 3 books. So we did all of that. Once we figured out which characters were going to be showcased in the story, and at which points in the story we started figuring out, okay, that's where we left that person. It's where that character, what they're doing now. And depending on how or what they're doing when we pick them up again, how do we reintegrate them into the main narrative? There was a lot of pre-planning in this. We spent months working out these kind of details before we even wrote an outline. So it was that kind of pre-plan, and that's a level of pre-planning that we just usually don't get to do. I mean, normally I'm given an assignment to write a book, I go do my research, I write an outline, I turn it in, and I'm a one-man band. And that's the same for all of the other authors. But for something like this, yeah, there was literally months of back and forth emails and Skype calls and brainstorming and coming up with ideas and discarding ideas and coming up with better ideas. And then we started doing our, research, and, websites like Memory Alpha and Memory Beta are great starting points for that kind of thing. Like, okay, now I know I got to go look at this book. I got to go look at this episode. I got to go do this. And pare it all down into something manageable, tame the beast as best we can.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, you seem to have like some favorite characters, right? Like every author does. It seems like really like Torek as a character, the Vulcan, right? You seem to like put him into most of your novels. Were there any moments when you were writing your outlines for Coda where you're like, man, if I had another 15 pages, I would definitely stick Torek in here somewhere, or anything along those lines? Any little personal favorites that you just wanted to include somewhere to figure out where they ended up their stories?
Without spoiling anything in book one, I got to use pretty much all the characters that I hoped to use. I mean, I had written several of the Next Generation novels that lead up to Coda. So I had a pretty good grip on where they were. But of course, we're talking about, in the cases of the books, we're talking about on-screen characters that have evolved over the course of all these novels, but also the characters that we either created or repurposed from some other part of Star Trek to incorporate into our crew on the Enterprise, because other characters have gone in different directions. So yeah, because my book is set primarily with the Enterprise crew, I got to use those characters again. So I was able to insert them into the narrative the way I saw fit for the story. And then the same thing with Jim and Dave. We each have our favorites, and we each have our personal kinks. So I think and that was part of it, was angling the storyline. So okay, he wants to do this with this set of characters, so how do we set up the narrative to flow to that naturally? That was again part of that brainstorming that we did before we even wrote outlines, involved a lot of that.
So that leads me to my go ahead, Jake.
Just real quick, so how far back do you go before you say there's no reasonable expectation that events, especially small events, that happen in a book past 2010 or 2005 or whatever it is there kind of that floor that says, okay, we shouldn't have that expectation that we're going back to the books in the 70s to make sure that we don't say something here that contradicts something there?
Unfortunately, that ship sailed years before I even got involved. The old Bantam books from the 70s were usually one-offs that did not even bother referencing the other books from that publisher, unless it was written by the same author. And even that was a rarity. I think only a couple of authors wrote more than one book.
Nobody needs to read Spock Messiah again.
Oh God, yeah. I read that one. Jesus.
And then the same thing with the early pocket novels. A lot of those were standalones, and a lot of them did not reference each other. They didn't necessarily overtly trip over each other, but they didn't.
They were as episodic as the show.
There was a time when that sort of thing was not encouraged by the licensing office, where they didn't want to see ongoing narratives with original characters. They wanted everything to focus on the prime. Excuse the expression, the prime crew. That the ability to interconnect and interweave and intertwine the narratives from different novel series is over the course of Trek publishing a fairly recent evolution, going back 20 years. And even then it was small and isolated, and just sort of kind of snowballed as the years moved on and things started getting more and more inserted into different narratives. And you could pluck characters from Deep Space Nine and put them on Next Generation, or you could take Tuvok from Voyager and put him on the Titan, and things like that. So it just sort of grew organically, and with all the different authors that were contributing to the different novel lines at that point, it just sort of kind of just reached a critical mass where it just was its own living thing that just kept going on.
If you're if you're worried about that or thinking about that being so convoluted, I won't even tell you about the comics and the period of I don't remember
He's
how long
some.
it was, but there was a time where there were several comic issues. Kirk was captain of the Excelsior and his crew because they had lost the Enterprise, did the whole the events of Star Trek 4. The 3, somewhere in there they had this whole thing where the Enterprise wasn't available, was being built or whatever. I don't know. Kirk was captain of the Excelsior, so they took the Enterprise crew and they put them there in the interim. So that was a completely random, like, we're just going to do this thing that makes no sense.
But not necessarily contradictory to anything else, at least.
It actually makes perfect sense. And again, I'm going to date myself. I started reading that comic series with issue number 1 in 1984. And the first issue came out not that long after Star Trek 2. Or it came out shortly before Star Trek 3 came out. But it picked up shortly after the events of Star Trek 2. And they were able to do their own thing for a couple of issues, and then Star Trek 3 came along. And of course, the folks writing the comics were aware that the film was coming. They had access to the script, and they knew what was going to happen, so they tailored their storyline to marry up with the film. And then as a lead out of Star Trek 3, that's where you get the Excelsior. It's like, okay, we know the Enterprise is gone, but the Excelsior is going to be here. And so they're going to work with that for a few issues. And then, Star Trek 4 comes along. And you'll notice if you go back and look at the issues that came out before Star Trek 4 hit theaters, you'll start to see the storyline wind its way back to the track that Star Trek 4 is on. And then it's just a natural bleed in. It's funny you bring up the comics because I've used those same comics as an analogy to what we're doing with the books. It's like every once in a while new Star Trek comes along and the stuff that's been going willy-nilly in books and comics has to change lanes to be in step with what's on screen.
Kind of like the New 52 from the DC side.
So
DC had to do it 3 or 4 times over the course of its short life. Those first 50 odd issues that came out, I think it had to change step at least 3 times across 3 different movies came out.
I think what you just said there is the perfect segue into the big question that's been on my mind and that the 3 of us have been battling around since David Mack started this whole thing. In October of 2014, we're all aware that Lucasfilm just said anything that's come out before this time is now Legends, and anything that comes after this will be considered the new canon. So it allowed authors who had explored the world in the past to explore the world in a different way. Is Coda kind of like that reset for Star Trek Litverse?
I don't know if I would call it a reset so much as I would call it a transition.
Okay.
The idea is that the stories that you have read over the past 20 odd years in particular, as they pertain to Coda, they did happen. And they do exist, and they're not canon. They never, no Star Trek novels canon and has never been canon. That said, we write them to be consistent with the canon as we know it to be when we're writing it. And we can only future-proof so far. I mean, when I started doing this, nobody thought, there's no way they're going to bring back Next Generation. There's no way they're going to bring back Captain Picard. No way. They're done, Couldn't. Never going to happen. Never say never in the world of tie-in writing.
See, and that kind of. Oh, go ahead.
No, you're fine. That's so basically, I don't want to call it a reset, a transition. To get back into step with what's on screen. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about shows like Lower Decks that are taking concepts from ancient canon like TAS, which for a while was also decanonized, or taking ideas from books and comics and such and bringing them into the canon again by way of an animated show?
I have absolutely no problem with it whatsoever.
Lower Decks is going to just twist up everything.
Lower Decks is there to just scramble your eggs, man.
Yes.
I love Lower Decks. I love the fact that it brings in stuff from the animated show because I'm a huge fan of the original animated series.
That's what our first interview was about today.
I love seeing those little callbacks to the animated show. When I first saw the script that had the description of the skeleton Spock,
that's literally what we talked about with our previous guests today. That episode and that
so hard at that when I read that. I said I can't wait to see that. And then because of what I do with CBS, I was able to see early animation And the first shots of that scene, just I couldn't, even if I'd wanted to, I couldn't take a screenshot because of the way the software works. It let you take a screen print, but I'm like taking pictures of it with my phone so that I could send it to my boss at CBS, and it's like, I can't believe they're going to do this.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that I really like about Lower Decks is because the animated series for the longest time was not considered canon, and then it got canonized. And what I like about Lower Decks is they are hammering home that the events in the animated series are canon. It's like they're hitting you with that rubber mallet of, we're going to reference all these things from the animated series. It is canon. We can't let folks avoid it. It is here. And I think the number of references that they make in Trek to the animated series seems like a little more than any other. That's kind of the impression that I have, is that they are pulling things from the animated series more than any of the other past Trek series.
I don't know for sure if that's true, but I suspect you are correct. I know that I count the Easter eggs. I specifically look for animated Easter eggs. And as silly as this sounds, one of the tasks that I am sometimes given is to go through a set of episodes and find all the Easter eggs and record them so that we can refer to them for various reasons. And I there's a lot across all the shows. I mean, it's some of the stuff is just almost throwaway. If you're not paying attention, you don't even notice it. And I consider myself pretty hardcore. And I've missed a few Easter eggs, particularly that one episode with the collector in his museum and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Every time I went back in, I'm like, I can't believe I missed that. God damn it! I mean, I did that 5 or 6 times in one day.
The season opener was that for me. I'm a Starships guy. I love ships. If you show me a ship, I'm like, oh, that's originally from this video game published in 1996. That first scene with Mariner breaking out of that prison, I was like, that's a snipe, or is it a Falcon? I wonder which version of it. And I was just pausing next frame. No, that's not a Hideki. That's not a Hideki, but it looks like one, kind of thing. I love the way that the show just makes you really go back and look over frame by frame sometimes.
I think my favorite part of the most recent episode was, have you seen it yet? The one where Mariner and
joking, right? I've seen them all.
Okay, yeah. My bad. I just want to make sure. I'm blaming David again.
He's read the script apparently.
But my favorite part of that episode was at the very end, the CBS burn. That was so nice. And then Batman 2 doors down. That was so cool. Especially because where I lived, DS9 aired on CBS, so it's just another slap to. Oh, did you guys lose me?
I think either somebody froze. It could have been me.
Might have been you. It sounded like Dad kept going just fine.
Oh, okay.
Subspace anomaly.
Yeah.
We're good. It's a wormhole.
The thing is, I'll read the scripts and they'll describe various Easter eggs, but they'll bake in so much more once they actually get to animation. That's not in the script.
Yeah.
So, in fact, I think it was last year when right before the first episode premiered of the first season, my boss sent me a screen grab from the first episode, and he said, I looked at this for 10 minutes and didn't see it. And I'm like, that sounds like one of those scam emails that you open up and there's a virus in it. So I looked at it and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know. And it's a picture of Mariner and Boimler in a closet. And I'm looking, I'm like, what am I supposed to be looking at? I don't know what I'm looking for. And then finally I saw it again, after 5 or 10 minutes. It's Nomad. The Nomad probe is just propped in a corner in the foreground. And I'd been staring at it for almost 10 minutes and I didn't see it.
I love that.
That's not in the script.
Yeah, when we do our episode teardowns, we have a section that we just go through. All right, here is all the deep cuts that they are referencing, all the Easter eggs. And we try to get as many as possible, and then we urge, the audience, find more. You can find more than us.
There was one in an episode that they, I can't remember who was wearing it, but the Spock helmet that was a toy.
Oh yeah,
It was not in any freaking TV episode. Nothing. It was a toy and one of the characters had that on.
Yep.
Like, oh
And
wow,
now.
that is yeah.
I knew
Spock's
that one
hat.
was coming because that one was in the script. They explicitly called that out in the script, like in this
Oh.
blocker full of
Love
stuff.
that.
There's the
Well,
Spock helmet.
And Renzo, you pointed out that it seems like the first episode of each season is now Ransom destroys the ship or something. Just the first one of the first season,
Ransom gets his
petrol
free
zombies.
time.
The second one, God. The third one, what are we gonna have next? Who
Yeah.
knows?
Who knows?
That's
Ah.
got to be a real double-edged sword of you're probably excited to get these scripts ahead of time, but seeing all the surprises or what's going to happen, it's like it just takes away. Does it take away any of the joy of watching the episode when you already know what's going to be coming up and, like, quote unquote, what the good parts are?
Not really. Again, it's particularly with the animated shows. Just because I read the script doesn't mean that's what I'm going to see. They'll make decisions to, they'll make edits and tweaks and changes as the show is developed, and the same with the live action. I've read the scripts for, all of the shows for the last couple of years, and particularly with the finales, they end up changing the finales, to varying degrees, well away from the script that I read. So I get to be surprised a little bit, but my wife likes to watch the shows too, so I've insulated her by not talking about what I'm reading in these scripts. I keep everything from her so that she can be surprised like a normal person when we're watching TV. But and every once in a while she'll ask me about something, and I'll go, "You really want me to tell you?" And she'll say,
Right.
No, I want to be surprised.
I say the
and
same
we watch
thing.
the episode, yeah. Then she watches the episode. She looks at me with this dirty look. She goes, "You knew that was going to happen, didn't you?" I'm like, "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "You asked me not to." So we do that a few times.
It was a case of I can't do anything right.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
I just say I'm sorry a lot.
And these guys, I've caught in hell from these guys as well. It was Discovery and Picard. Oh, I wouldn't watch the preview. Yeah, it was Discovery. Both. I wouldn't watch the preview for the next episode. Wouldn't do it. And they would want to talk about, like, the next episode a little bit. And I said, I haven't watched the trailer for the next one.
Yeah.
And I've told this story before to them. You remember the show 24?
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Way back when? Okay, so I would not watch the preview for the next episode. I did not want to see how Jack Bauer got out of whatever situation he was in there at the end of that episode. So when the episode ended, I changed the channel. I would not watch the preview. And
Clock at the top of the hour, you were out. Huh?
right, I was done.
Okay.
I'm out. No previews. And I did the same challenge for. I want to say it was Star Trek Into Darkness. That I did not watch any previews for that. Not for that, and not for The Dark Knight Rises. It was about 2 years before those that I took on that challenge of, I'm not watching any trailers or anything. I'm going to sit there and just have it be a pure experience. I can't tell you how hard that was. Oh, I was dying because I had all my friends saying, "Hey Jeff, did you see that preview for the new Star Trek? Did you see this?" I was like, no, you're not making this any easier. I'm doing this. It was kind of like the water ice challenge, or the
ice
Tide
bucket
Pod.
challenge.
Yeah, the ice bucket or the Tide Pod challenge. I'm doing
Let's
doing this
not
stuff.
do Tide Pods.
Oh, right. Yeah. Let's not do that.
That's
Oh.
ivermectin for millennials.
I got to watch the 3 JJ movies like a normal person. I didn't know anything about them going in.
That's good.
That's nice.
I was spoiled for the first season of Discovery, because I had been contracted to write a Discovery novel that would premiere right around the time that Lorca's big twist was revealed.
Ooh.
In season 1. So
could
I
you-
wrote that book all the way knowing that was going to happen. So,
Could you confirm something for me, if you do know about it? Sounds like you were kind of on the behind the scenes. I can't recall where I read this or heard this, but in a sense, the Discovery was just like, what they were doing was crazy. It was ridiculous, and apparently showrunners were smoking crack or something. I don't know, but the show was just going off the rails. And eventually, it got high enough up. I don't recall. The studio got word that these are the things that are happening. The Klingons are unrecognizable. They're doing this or doing that, and this happening. And it was basically came back down of, you've got to unfuck this show. This has gotten out of hand, because it seemed like there was this sudden hiatus in the middle of the season. And I believe it may not be true, but I believe what happened was that there was a big course correction that was being made to kind of still follow where the season was going, but to try to fix what was behind it and steadily get away from the train wreck that was created. Was there anything like that you heard, that it did not start out the way I guess was expected, and there was a stopping point to try to figure out, okay, where can we do this, get to the off ramp, because it's not going the way that it was intended?
No, there was a deliberate break in the season.
Okay.
That was always a part of the schedule. I mean, I knew about that well before we hit that mid-season break, and I had read all the 15 scripts, so there was no break or lag between one script and another while they retooled. I got to read them all at a regular pace. So that sounds like a YouTube video gone off the rails.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah. Now, as far as the changes
anything
that we saw between first and second seasons, a lot of that is attributed to new showrunners with new ideas, and they want to take the show in a different direction. And that obviously you can see that on the screen between what happened between season 1 and season 2. You obviously see the differences as far as the tone set by a new showrunner, or in this case, a pair of showrunners. And that's true of any series of television that changes the person at the top of the pyramid, because they're going to mold that show the way they want to. That's what they get paid to do. They get paid ridiculous amounts of money to make a TV show.
Wow, I want that kind of money. So basically, season 1 went exactly how it was supposed to. There was no okay, no, this was wrong.
I don't know if exactly. I mean, no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. I'm sure that they dealt with all manner of logistical, budget, timing issues, and that's before we get into talking about trying to produce a show during a pandemic. I mean, they didn't even have that to think about yet.
Right.
New show, new idea, new delivery method. Using your big your big tentpole franchise. There's all that pressure is on to do it well. But the idea that it got kicked to streaming because it couldn't, it was meant to launch the streaming service, or meant to help launch the streaming service. It was always going to be that way. I see and read and hear a lot of these kind of rumors that get circulated on the internet, and that's what a large amount of them are either rumor, unfounded rumor, wishful thinking, rationalization for why I don't like something. That's how I look at it personally.
Yeah.
So other people might look at it a different way, but
sitting
I think
here
where I sit, I'm like, nah, that's not right. I mean, I read rumors every day about what's going to happen on Strange New Worlds or what's going to happen on Picard, and I just laugh because it's never right.
So changing tacks back a bit to the Woodverse, right? You are one of the 3 authors here who have this challenge of essentially writing the Coda, hence the name, to a literary tradition that's been going on for decades, right? What are some special challenges that you guys had to take apart just to handle this? Because you knew you only had so many books to do it in, right? If they'd given you 5 books, you could have written 5 books. But with 3, what were some things you guys had to choose to do? I know you mentioned that there were these group chats and these big discussions that everything got hashed out before they got writing to. But what made this more unique for you guys?
Well, we did originally pitch this as a larger project. I think we pitched it as what I called them 4 core books. So instead of the 3, you would have had at least 4. And then I also had pitched what I called a couple of stealth setup books, which would be it might be a Next Generation novel, it might be a Deep Space Nine novel, it might be some other novel that at the time of publication, when you read it, it reads like a regular standalone or just run-of-the-mill Star Trek Next Generation storyline. But once you start to read Coda, You realize we'd already taken the time to set up pieces on the game board for you. You're like, oh, I got to go back and reread that part. That's what I was hoping to do, but unfortunately circumstances and logistics and whatever got in the way of that grand plan, and we had to whittle it down to 3 books. So then you start prioritizing. What do you really want to see in this? First of all, what's our main goal? And then you work backward from there. And how do we best accomplish that goal? Which characters are best suited to do these things? And, how do we mix them together in such a way? And which plot threads from different book lines can we address that A, we can give it time, and B, it matters to the main story we're trying to tell. We're not going to make everybody happy. I know that already. I've already gotten my first piece of disappointment mail. So
it hasn't even come out yet.
It hasn't even come out officially yet. I've already got somebody who hates me.
Man,
so,
I just wanted to be a part of it because the artwork was great.
It's just, but you can't. There's just so much there, and we have so little space to really do what we want to do with this properly. You have to make choices, and you have to prioritize. And we did the best we could with what we had to work with. And, we had to make some creative choices. We also had to make some choices that respected the wishes of other authors. It's like, oh, well, please don't do this to such and such, or please don't do this with this thing. I would really appreciate if you didn't blow this up, or something like that.
We have an example
I'm being
of
very
that.
vague and very snarky
okay.
when I say that. I'm not trying to point you in the direction of something. I'm just saying there were conversations with certain authors about certain things that they asked us, well, I prefer you not go in that direction. Okay, we won't. We'll find another way, or we'll do without, or we'll ever. It was a large undertaking. Anybody who thinks we didn't
give an example of that by chance?
No,
that
not
you're
without
comfortable?
spoiling anything.
Okay. Fair enough.
Everything's on the table. I don't want to spoil anything.
I mean, an example of something you didn't do, though, right? Not something that you did.
No, I don't want to do that because
all
then,
right.
such and such isn't in the book. I'm like, well, no, that's not what I'm saying at all.
Okay.
We may have
No
found
spoilers.
a different way to do
I
it.
wanted to pivot off something you said, Dayton. You said that you pitched this book. You pitched it with the other 2 authors. I wanted to ask about the level of back and forth between you as an author with this idea and CBS, who may or may not have a direction. Is it you pitch an idea and they go, hey, that sounds kind of good, do these 5 things, and off you go? Or do they come at you and are like, we want a transition series, we want you to write it, go forth?
We came to them. We came to our editors first, and we said we know where things stand. We know where things are with the series that's coming. At this point, we're talking about Star Trek Picard. That's still a year or more from premiering, because we had these first conversations. I had my first conversation about this topic probably in early to mid 2018. Is when I can remember taking my first notes, because that's when I first started seeing information coming out of the writer's room for Picard. This is before they even announced the series in Vegas.
Okay.
I'd already started to see documents, and I'd started to see story synopses documents, and the backstory document that Kirsten Beyer had put together for writers on the show to give them sort of a Star Trek primer, and not just stuff that has already happened that fans would already know about, but things they had invented for Picard's backstory. The backstory that would inform season 1. That was already in a document. So once I got to see that, I knew where the stakes were in the ground and how they impacted the books, not just the ones that we wanted to write, but the books we'd already written. And so I started taking notes with this stuff 3 years ago, and I didn't actually get a chance to have a conversation with Dave Mack about it at length until a year later, when we got to meet together at a convention, and we sat in the bar and we talked this out. And come to find out, Dave had been doing very similar things. He had been taking notes and pondering and talking to an editor and figuring out what we could do. And we finally figured out, okay, we're already aligned, more or less. We just need to, get in step with each other and bring in somebody else. And once we figured out which writers were going to be involved, then we started running. It was a very collaborative and very intense little process there for a while.
So what led to this? Basically, you woke up one day and just decided, I'm going to reset everything that happened in the Trek Litverse, or transition it. Was it something that you saw or heard or said that made you want to take on something like this, taking all these works and saying, okay, yes, it did happen, but we're moving on. We're going to go in this other different direction.
I knew that as soon as I knew that they were going to make Star Trek Picard, which was very early in 2018. I had a conversation with Kirsten Beyer, and she told me, we've been friends for years, and she called me and told me, and I had been giving her, she had been calling me throughout the production of season 1 of Discovery, because she was also helping me with, as I wrote that novel. And so she started telling me about Picard, and the first warning bell, like, oh, that could be a problem for the books. I had that first notation in my head. And then once I saw the backstory document that she had put together, I'm like, okay, now I know what I'm dealing with. So for me, it was middle of 2018 when I knew that something had to be done. Didn't know what it was going, or something was going to happen. Didn't know what that was going to be. Didn't know why. Didn't know to what extent. But I had started taking notes that far. I started building a timeline on a spreadsheet of all the cool Star Trek things that happened in the films and on the different TV shows and in the books, and started figuring out, where are the threads that we can pull on. And I had a conversation or two with my editors at Simon & Schuster about, we should start thinking about this. Again, no real idea of what that was going to be. We were still waiting to see what the show was going to do. We were still basically waiting for Picard to develop to a point where we had a clear understanding of what they were going to do with their first season.
Okay, so why Picard, and what was it you read or that you saw that prompted the thought of this is why we need to do something? Why was it Picard, and what was it you saw that made you come to that conclusion?
Well, it was Picard because they told me that they were going to set Picard 20 years after Star Trek Nemesis.
Right.
Which is more or less where the books were operating. So already we knew that we had a potential for a conflict.
Right.
What keyed it off for me was when I read the backstory document, and it's not a spoiler now because it's from season 1. I read about the Mars attack, which takes place in 2385, which at the time was almost 2 years in the past of the continuity we had established in the books.
Right.
Okay. So to me, that was a triggering event in terms of, okay, well, it's already a problem because we
episode 1 problem. Yeah.
So it's like, okay, it's already an issue. I guess problem's not the right word. A challenge or an issue. It's a challenge. So that's our challenge, is the fact that, the big event that motivates Star Trek Picard, is right in our backyard. And we're already too far past it. It's not like we can just say, oh, and by the way, Mars blew up 2 years ago. We can't just do that. I mean, I guess you can, but you'd end up pissing off a lot of people.
We can't go to Mars. It's still on fire. What?
We can just call the time to the books Legends, or whatever. That'll make everybody happy.
Yeah.
So I knew we didn't want to do a Legends. I knew we didn't want to do a thing where we go, well, okay, well, that's it. We'll just flip a switch and then we'll just pick up where the TV show. Nobody wanted to do that. That was never a serious consideration.
Good. Well, the Whitverse fans definitely appreciate you doing that then, right? Like, giving us some form of closure is just great, considering what happened to the expanded universe of Star Wars. That, flip of a switch left a lot of people very, very hurt.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not even a big Star Wars reader. I've read, I don't know, a couple of dozen of them over the years, maybe. But, as a fan of tie-in material, that kind of thing, I'm of two minds. Like, yes, I'm a tie-in writer, so I know the job's dangerous, and that anything I write can be circumvented by later canon. That's just, the job is dangerous, and we know that when we take it. But as a fan and a reader, I get that. I get that sense of, I can't believe I spent all that time and money reading these books, and they just totally wiped them away.
Yep.
I understand that. With Star Trek, though, it's different because we always knew they weren't canon, and they could face a reset at any point, and it's just, I think this is unprecedented in a way because we were allowed so much latitude for so many years to do the things that we did in the pages of those books across the different series and with all the different characters. I mean, I can't think of a comparable example where we had that kind of ongoing freedom to play with these characters, and then get to a point where all of a sudden it cranks up production again, and we're faced with the reality of what basically every line of tie-in books about every movie or film has always faced, that you're going to be overwritten by what's on TV. It's just odd that it came that way. So we felt it warranted something more than just saying, okay, flip the switch. We'll I used the DC Comics analogy that we were talking before. I said those guys were given an opportunity to retool their storylines and get back in sync with the films. Can we do that with these books? You guys get to read it and decide if we did it or not.
I love
Is there anything you want
that.
to tell us? Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say one observation based on what Renzo said, and then another question for you, Dayton. So, Renzo, I think the reason that happened with Star Wars, and this is a big spoiler, I don't recall which book it is right off the top of my head. It has to deal with a very major character. So, if you don't want to hear any spoilers about any of the Star Wars books,
It's 7 years ago.
Star Wars books.
There's Darth
Right,
Sidious and Darth Plagueis.
No,
No,
he's
it
talking
was-
about Chewbacca having Serpentine fall on him. Yeah,
There
I
you
know.
go. Yeah. So I think maybe that it was because they went that far that it was okay, now
I don't think that's
This-
fair because the Star Trek
don't
Litverse
think
has
that was
done
the
way
trigger?
bigger than that. Yeah, no,
Oh, yeah.
the Star Trek Litverse has been major changes in that. They have
Okay.
Janeway died. Pluto as a planet got absorbed into a Borg contraption. They blew up parts of Vulcan, and Doria is depopulated. Like they've done all
Nausicaa
sorts of
was
merry hell.
assimilated by the Borg.
No,
Jesus.
yeah, no, the Star Trek Litverse went through its apocalypse, right? And the
Yeah.
Typhon Pact is
More
what's come
than one.
afterwards. And yes,
That was that was
So-
the other thing too. Dave Mack did a quite fine job of obliterating the Borg. In the Destiny trilogy. And
Right.
Oh,
lo
that
and
trilogy
behold-
was great.
Yeah, and then lo and behold, here's a Borg in Star Trek Picard season 1. There's a Borg ship, and it's like, well,
So
okay,
how
there's
do
another
we-
challenge that we have to deal with.
That's another one.
Makes perfect sense.
I think the problem, it's not a problem. The difference between Star Trek and Star Wars is that Star Trek has always made no bones about the fact that novels and comics and other expanded media are not part of the canon.
right.
Whereas Star Wars, they tried to have their cake and eat it too. They tried to tell all the fans that these books and these novels are canon. They're levels of canon, which is sort of like levels of pregnancy or levels of circumcision. And I equate it as like
You either
canon.
top it off or you don't.
You're only
There's no
mostly
between.
Canon
dead.
is like being pregnant or being circumcised. You either are or you're not. And and so I think George Lucas finally came out at one point not that long ago and acknowledged, yeah, I didn't pay attention to any of that stuff. I just paid attention to the movies I was making. So by default, that means the Star Trek stuff really wasn't canon. Not really, not in any way that mattered.
Right.
Now, they may have said, well, as long as we don't contradict it, it's canon. Okay, I'm like, all right, that's fine, but no film director is going to stand on a soundstage with a $100 million movie that they're helming, and they go, I can't do this because some guy wrote a comic in 1984
Nope.
Right.
that
Right.
7 of you wrote. 7 of you. That's never going to happen.
Nope.
As far as I know, that's never happened. And if somebody has an example of that, I'd like to hear it.
Right. And even when I hear it, I'm not doing it. So, and this was the question that I had is, what keeps the books from falling away from that thread of being coordinated? What keeps this from having to happen again somewhere down the line?
Oh, well, I mean, ideally, since Star Trek is active now again, and there are people working at CBS who are invested in the idea that we're trying to give these expanded media platforms room to maneuver, so to speak, and give them safe spaces where they can operate and maybe not get overwritten quite so cavalierly. And not to imply that this was cavalier, it wasn't. But the idea that, it's kind of like what Lucasfilm established with their story group. They put together the folks who can say, okay, you can do these things in the books and you can do these things in the comics, and these two talk to each other. And if you stay within these, this perimeter, then the movies aren't going to walk over you too much, or not at all, hopefully, in the best case scenario. But I think even that's been, shown to be pie in the sky to a certain degree. I mean, again, we go back to the example of the film director is never going to cede to the comic book writer. Okay, it's just not going to happen. And I think the same is, but again, they set that trap for themselves when they established, the quote levels of canon unquote in Star Wars. Whereas Star Trek just said, yeah, none of that's canon. We're not following it, for better or worse, depending on how you feel about it. My thing about canon is it's great if you are writing for the shows, and it's great to have in hand if you are writing any of the products tying into the shows. But if you're just a fan, it really shouldn't matter. I mean, it's just, if you think the Vanguard novels happened then they happen. I think they happen. I think the Vanguard novels happen, and I think certain episodes of various TV shows never happen because I hate them. I won't name them out loud, but there are
Threshold.
Shadow play.
And the children shall lead, Threshold,
Code of Honor.
that kind of stuff. This, in my head, those episodes did not happen, but the Vanguard novels, every single word in all of those books happened in my head.
So
Great books too.
Yeah.
is this kind of a way to? I don't want to use placate or satisfy, but is this a way for the writers to get a better, I guess, a sense of, we don't want you to spend all this time on this book and this novel and this writing just for your work to be negated by the next episode of a show or the next movie? Because I would think that if that keeps happening, you're going to say, okay, why am I doing this? Why am I spending all of this time and effort writing this book just for it to be blown away, by the next series or the next show?
Well, I mean, it goes back to what I said before. Anybody who does this for any length of time, they know that that's a possibility. That's just the nature of the beast. You write the best story you can, the most entertaining story you can, based on the property as you know it to be when you write the book. You can't future-proof everything.
Right.
What you can do is just you do the best job you can when you're at bat. And that's anything else is out of your control. I mean, the studios are going to do what they think they need to do to make money with this property, and the people who read. The people who read the best-selling, most popular number of units pushed Star Trek novel in the history of the franchise is still a fraction of the people who watch the lowest-rated episode of any TV series.
Right.
It's just simple math. You got to go where the most eyeballs are. But that said, for us as writers of this material, we know that the people who read the books are very devoted and very supportive and very passionate about them. And we are too, because to a person, every one of us is a fan. A deep hardcore fan, like, have them on your drunken trivia team because they're going to help out.
Oh man, if you want to do trivia, we can do trivia. I'd love that.
It's as much for us as it is for the readers. I mean, we are getting a chance to do something unprecedented, or at least largely unprecedented in this.
And as authors, you get to do very different things than the shows do anyways, right? Like there's nothing on TV that's going to come up that's like Articles of the Federation from Keith DeCandido, right? Like there's nothing on there. There's no Star Trek meets West Wing, which is essentially what that book was, right? And
there was a time when I would have said that never happened, but I mean,
never
say never in this business,
Let's not kid ourselves here. The books are licensed and produced by an organization that, at the top of the food chain, they're there to make the money. Who is going to buy these books? The fans. What do the fans want? They want what they're watching. And this transition, I think, is one of the perfect ways to keep the new fans, ones who found it through the JJ verse and Discovery and Picard. Those fans are going to be the ones who are going to be going to the books. The old fans who've already been brought along 20 years of the relaunch novels and Rebecca Sisko and all those other things, those fans are going to go right along with this. And honestly, between you, James, and David, I don't think the Litverse franchise can be in better hands. Because you are the fans and you love this stuff so much. Like, it's the perfect way to shepherd the old and the new into this transition.
Any regrets for all this, though, out of curiosity, Dayton? Any regrets for things that you couldn't include, that you didn't get to do? Or things that you did in a previous book that you're like, shit, I wish I would have known that Discovery was going to do this, or that Picard was going to do that?
He regrets killing the current Litverse. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, first of all,
too soon.
Back to your point. Thank you, and on behalf of Jim and Dave, I thank you for the kind words. There's a fine line that we have to walk. It's that the tie-in books that we write have to be accessible to a broad audience, or we attempt to make them accessible to as broad an audience as feasible. But we also know that there's a core group of people who read these books, and they've been along for the entire ride. So how do you balance the need to make the books accessible, to people who are brand new to this? There are people who are going to be reading these books that have never read a Star Trek book before, but they've heard the hype. They're hearing about it. Somebody's going to talk about it. They're going to pick it up, or they're going to see it in the store and they're going to think it looks cool and they're going to give it a shot. You want that person. You want to bring that person into the fold, but at the same time, you also want to do right by the people who've been there by your side the whole way. So it's hard. It's a hard act to balance. It's tough to try to meet all of that. So, but as fans of this material, that's where our heart is when we do this, particularly something like this. We know what it means to people. We're trying not to do it wrong. And whether we do it right or not, and we manage to transition to what the shows are going to be doing, that's for you all to decide. As far as regrets, I don't know. I got to do some stuff in this book that I have never been able to do in any Star Trek book, me personally. So, and without spoiling anything, I got to have a lot of fun's not the right word. I got a lot of freedom to do some things that I never thought I'd be able to do in a Star Trek book, and you'll understand what that means once you read my book, and then it's particularly after you've read Jim and Dave's, because a lot of what I'm doing in book 1 sets up the action in book 2 and book 3.
No, I think I'm gonna have to read these books.
So
we're definitely going to.
So hopefully, we did right. Hopefully we did right by as many people as we could.
Well, I'd love to get you back on the show after they're all out, and we can actually talk about them like hindsight.
Yes.
In
Assuming we're not in hiding and fearful for our lives, sure,
Well,
we'll be back.
We'll always be
Trek
there for
fans
you.
won't be that way.
But
Well, I'm not a big book reader, so that's why I say that. I should, if I'm going to read anything, I can't even remember the last time I read a book. It's got to be over 10 years, because everything's just online now. It's hard for me to sit and read a book, because I could be saying to myself, I'm sure there's something else I should be doing right now, or could be doing, and ooh, squirrel, things like that. So going back just real quick about trying to keep the writers happier about not having their work trampled on. Have there been any good writers that actually quit and left and stopped because of situations like that, where they do you write these novels and then it just gets blown away?
I'm not aware of that. I mean, there are people who used to write Star Trek novels that don't write them anymore for a variety of reasons. But I don't know of anybody who just decided they'd had enough and didn't want to do it anymore. If that's the case, they've never communicated that to me. At least not that way, for sure. I mean,
Right.
sometimes people, I can't even hold myself up as a typical Star Trek novelist, because I just dig doing it. I'll do it for as long as they let me. I will ride this wave until somebody drop kicks me right out of the boat.
Dream
and then
job.
I'll hang on for dear life. What's that?
You've got my dream job.
No, I mean it's been a hell of a ride. It's been a lot of fun. I've been blessed with a lot of opportunities because of that silly contest from 20 odd years ago. But I will, some people decide they want to write other things and they move on to do that, or they write both and they don't write as many Star Trek novels as they used to. I think there's a mix of everything out there in terms of the stable of writers who have contributed to Star Trek over the years. I don't know. It's just one of those things that cycle. I guess it's cyclical. Sooner or later, somebody's going to get tired of my crap, and I'm not going to write anymore. Star Trek. But
That day is not today.
But today is not that day.
Hey.
Nope.
I have questions about Moments Asunder. Renzo, if you're going to ask a more relevant question before I kind of switch back over.
No, it's just a question about a particular thread that the Witverse took. That I wanted to see if Dayton had a particular take on it at all.
Go for it.
Okay, so Dayton, I'm sure you're aware that Bill Shatner and Judith Reese Garfield wrote a series of the Shatnerverse novels, is what they've been nicknamed, right?
I know where you're going.
I know that they're generally not considered a part of the mainstream Witverse canon or the storyline that was being followed. Did you enjoy those novels yourself personally? Did you find any ideas from those that you wish you could have brought back in somehow, or anything along those lines? I find that, admittedly, those are the first novels of Star Trek that I read, and those were what got me into it, and then I expanded and read everything else, right? So that's kind of why I asked.
Mm-hmm. I read the first... let me think. I know I read the first 6 that took us through the Mirror Universe arc that he wrote.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I read the next trilogy, the Captain's
Blood, Peril,
Blood,
those,
Peril,
yeah.
Glory. I don't think I read those, and I did not read the Academy book that he did. Not for lack of desire. I have a copy on my shelf. I just have not gotten to it. I remember enjoying the first Shatner book particularly, the one that he kind of had as a sequel to Star Trek VI. And the return, I enjoyed it, but man, that had Bill Shatner written all over it.
So
Yes, it did.
I have to jump in right there because you mentioned earlier that you're the kind of person that you want to have on your trivia team at the pub. That book was the tie-breaking question at my trivia game at my pub like 3 years ago, and they were like, "Okay, here's the question." They barely got it out of their throat before I'm screaming, "Bill Shatner!" because they wanted to know who wrote, the return of Captain Kirk after he died, and I was just like, ah.
Well, it immediately followed Generations, and
Right.
it had Bill's name all over it because it was, I'm not satisfied with what was done with my character, so I'm going to bring it back and have it be a more. Yeah, I read that one, and I got to tell you, it was an interesting read, but it bordered on the ridiculous. Honestly,
and we, as the writers of the other Star Trek novels, we had been advised that the Shatnerverse novels were their own thing.
Okay.
And we were not to overtly make any overt references to them. That said, I think I managed to sneak in one or two references every once in a while.
Nice.
On the sly. They're not obvious at all, but because at the time I was just digging on the idea that Bill Shatner's writing Star Trek novels. That's pretty cool, or helping write Star Trek novels or whatever. I don't know. Just as a fan, I thought I got a kick out of it. I think what happened was that Mr. Shatner had the idea that he would get his Search for Spock movie.
I
And
gave him that impression.
there would be a resurrection of Captain Kirk in a future Star Trek film, and obviously that was not to be. So he retooled his idea to work as a book.
There was an Into Darkness, right? Kirk died and got brought back. It just wasn't Shatner's Kirk.
Come on, man.
A lot of people, make issue of the fact that he wrote those with the Reeve Stevens, and who did what and how much did he actually write, and I have no problem believing that the Reeve Stevens probably did a lot of the heavy lifting as far as the actual hard part of writing the book, but knowing what I know about him, I know he was involved in the storyline. I know he was involved with his thoughts about the character. I know he poured over the things. And a lot of people forget that way back when, long before he was Captain Kirk, he acted on stage and he wrote plays for the theater that he worked in Montreal. So the idea that he's a writer is not outside the realm.
Right. Well, and he did all the Tech War series and stuff too.
But this is before that. We're talking in the 50s he was writing stuff. And people forget that. But of course, Bill Shatner then and Bill Shatner now are two completely different people. He just doesn't. The man has boundless energy. It's ridiculous how much energy the guy has at 90 years old. I hope I have half that energy when I'm his age. I hope I make it to his age, number one. And
I'm 44 and I don't have that energy. I'm 30 right now.
I was at a thing where he was at back in July up at the Star Trek set tour up Ticonderoga, New York, and the man is a machine. He's just I get tired just watching him do his thing.
Wow.
And regardless of what anybody has to say about the Shatnerverse novels, whether you think they're amazing or not, I still find them wonderfully entertaining. They're on my bookshelf next to my Invasion series.
You read Invasion?
I posted them in the server today because S-Spice wanted them.
That one was awesome too.
But yeah, I can't get enough, and I'll take it whichever way I can, whether I like it or not. But onto Moments Asunder, I have two questions. One, for the audience, are there any books that have already come out that are available now that the audience should maybe read
or reread
to sort of brief them on the direction that Coda is going to take them?
Well, I will tell you that everything you need to know about what's come before is in the books.
Okay.
we do what we can to bring everybody up to speed, and in furthering that, not just in the narrative, but each book has a section at the front. Normally all the Star Trek books have a brief, what they call an historian's note. This book takes place at this point in time. We went hog wild with that idea, and we wrote I think each book has a 3 or 4 page section that outlines all the heavy points from various novels.
That's
going
awesome.
back all the way to DS9's finale and coming forward.
That's fantastic.
So it's already written in there to give you what you need to know.
It gives you the plot point, inside the box, and then it tells you which book that came from. And those are what we consider to be the key points that drive Coda or link to Coda. I think Dave may have published I have to check his feed. He may have done it today. He had published a brief list of books that he thought would be good, worthy of revisiting if you had the time and inclination to do so. And as it happens, in the best Star Trek tradition possible, he came up with 47 books. So I don't know that he went ahead and actually published that, or he's holding off until tomorrow. I don't recall offhand. Anyway, as storytellers, our job is to bring you in and hopefully not leave you flailing. And we did our best to do that. But as an extra kick, we added those previously on sections. So you can almost hear Majel Barrett saying previously on Star Trek.
Right.
I love it.
So.
I love it. The second question I have is a bit more invasive into the story itself. But if there's anybody out there who is a fan of, let's say any given specific character, would you be able to say, hey, if you're fans of Worf, you really want to read this book? You don't have to say anything. I'm just asking if you can.
Yes, you can do that. I mean, you can. I would be hard pressed to think of particularly a major character, not counting, obviously
The dead ones.
Yar,
Janeway.
Yeah, the people who are legitimate. Well, yeah, the people who are legitimately dead in the novel verse or wherever. All of the main casts particularly from the 24th century shows are represented, as particularly, in the context of how they appear in the novel's continuity that we've established and progressed with. There are a few surprises. There are a couple of interesting callbacks. We were basically given a mandate to, swing for the fences on this one. That was basically, if you boil down our editor's directions, it was just like, go for it, go for broke, YOLO. And
I love it. I
think if you're a fan, particularly of the 24th century shows, somebody you love is in there somewhere.
Oh,
was
absolutely.
there anything? I'm sorry, Dad, go ahead.
Oh, I was confirming. Yes, I'm dying to read this series.
Again, we take into account the direction of various series and where the characters are and where things are on the board, where we need them, in relation to where our story picks up. But if it made sense to bring them in, then we tried to do so.
Was there anything in a previous book or episode or movie that just completely killed an idea that you had or something that you wanted to do badly enough, and maybe thought about, this is very valid for what we're doing in this book, in this 3-part book, but this novel from a couple or so or whatever years ago completely takes away our ability to do this one major thing, and you know what? We're just gonna do it and hope that nobody has read that book or remembers that part. Anything like that?
I can't consciously think of anything where I can't think of anything where we made the conscious decision to say that doesn't count, or that book didn't count. Now, again, I'm talking about within the context of the established continuity.
Mm-hmm.
The interconnected continuity is the prime mover. I mean, I can't say we didn't, contradict a novel that's not part of that extended continuity that was published 30 years ago or 20 years ago or 25 years ago. But as far as the interconnected continuity across all the different series, as far as I remember, we were able to find a workaround if we encountered a conflict. Like, we were able to figure out a way to deal with that potential obstacle.
Gotcha. Okay, that's good. So it sounds like there weren't, for as many books as there are, not to mention the episodes and movies, it sounds like you guys were able to wad through the minefield and not really touch any.
Well,
I mean, that's a feat right there in of itself.
And it could be that the result that we ended up on was, okay, that book established that this thing happened, and we can't undo that. So we're not going to touch that. We're going to go in a different direction. We're going to, we're going to acknowledge it and find another way to tell the story that we need to tell. Again, other writers have done things with different characters, different situations, and they've let some of them, left them in places that they preferred we leave them there. So we did that as best we could. Other situations were naturally resolved, or they were left unresolved in a way that gave us wiggle room. It's like, oh, well, you know what? They never really did say what happened to so-and-so. Nobody knows. We can totally make that work.
Well, yeah. Mace Windu's still alive. Sure.
Exactly. Or whatever. And then, so, I mean, there were a lot, there were so many different permutations to that question and different ways that we had to deal with that, because there's just so much going on in these 3 books.
Hey, Renzo, no one saw him hit the pavement. I saw
it's true.
They didn't find a body, did you?
There's no body.
It's not murder if you can't find a body.
So, Dayton, I've got one last question, and I'm going to take a step back from Star Trek on this one. So, just as a nerd's nerd, somebody who reads a lot of science fiction, it seems, and who's very familiar with everything that's going on in there, are there any novels, classics, anything else that you particularly find yourself always being like, man, I want to write something kind of like this, but damn, that'd be too much like Dune. Or that sounds a little bit like Rendezvous with Rama, right? Like any of your great all-time favorites that you just find yourself always being like, that thing is so good, I wish I could reference it somehow.
The closest thing I can come up to is I had an idea for a novel that I was going to pitch, not a Star Trek novel. I was going to develop an original science fiction idea, and it was about a war that was being fought, and the people who were fighting it were pulled from different points in time and deposited at a different point in time. And then that Chris Pratt movie comes out.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
Called The Tomorrow War. I'm like, well, there you go. So I fed that into a shredder. And I had been thinking about this off and on for several years, and not really. It just seemed like anytime I tried to get any head of steam on it, I got pulled back into Star Trek or something else, or just laziness or whatever. So I saw this movie advertised for Amazon. I'm like, that's so close to my story. They'll say I'm ripping them off.
Damn.
Yeah.
Oh well. So that's what I get for dragging my feet.
And in the overall grand scheme of things, if there was something you missed, some piece of canon or whatever it is, rest assured, a Star Trek fan is going to find it.
Yes.
And you're going to be hammered on that one thing. It's going to be one sentence that you should not have written that's just going to tank the entire novel. You just wait for it. Yeah.
You
sound like my Twitter feed.
That happens with every book, though. That happens with every book I've ever written. So, I mean, that's not new territory. I've got the scars.
Yeah.
You got a dramatis personae in these, by the way?
I'm sorry?
The DS9
Did you put a dramatis personae in these books? Just like cast of characters kind of thing, with who they are now, that kind of thing?
Oh, no, not for this one, no.
Okay.
I mean, no, I didn't. I mean, we've done that for other projects that we've worked on. Like we did it for the Vanguard novels and or Dave did it for the Vanguard novels, and then we repeated that idea for the Seekers novels that we did. But we did not do that for this. I mean, there's so many characters. They already have faces in this thing.
Fair enough.
So, I'm sorry, Renzo, could you guys tell me what that is? I guess I'm
Sure.
not.
The dramatis personae is something that they have in plays, particularly. It's found in some books, but it's like the Captain Picard, Captain of the USS Enterprise, Jean-Luc Picard. Maybe it'll say where he's from. Then it'll be like William T. Riker, blah 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 from such and such, and it just gives you like their rank or position kind of. It's not supposed to be like their biography. It's just like,
it's like
if you don't know who these are, here's your cast list.
I've seen those. I didn't realize that's what it was called.
Yeah.
We didn't do that for this, no, because we just figured, if you're reading a Star Trek novel, you're probably going to be up to date with the people on the cover or the people in the cast. We've done that. I don't think we've ever done that even with the original characters that we created. It's just, I don't know. It's just not one of those things. Now, for writing the Vanguard and the Seekers novels, again, we had a Bible for those books that we put together. or Dave put it together for Vanguard, and then we put together a revised version of the Vanguard one with the emphasis on the Seekers characters. And we went so far as to provide, backstories for those characters, and even a headshot for who our dream actor would be to play that role if this was on TV, that kind of thing, just for our own consistency. Like, okay, I can write this character because I think Steve Buscemi plays him in the movie, that kind of
Gotcha. Gives him a voice in your head.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Well, I think that just for length of the book and of these works, the reader has to come in with, you have to have some expectation that you've read this or this character, because we can't do background stories and give a synopsis of every background character. It's kind of like for I don't know if you're a Marvel fan or not, but the Avengers movies, especially Infinity War and Endgame, to completely understand all of that, it's your responsibility to have walked in and have seen the 20 movies or whatever it is prior to that, because it's like, okay, this movie is going to be 3 hours already. We cannot do backstories or how we got here. Just if you want to understand it, then you will have made sure that you've watched all these up to this point. If you don't, then this movie is not the one that's going to do that for you.
Yeah, we did the backstories. They're in the other 20 movies.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, we've got
not to be flippant. Not to be flippant. Again, that's what the previously sections are in the beginning of each book. Is it provides what we consider to be the high points. Of the narrative that informs Coda, the from across all the different series, and we think that is obviously you're gonna get more out of it if you've been following us along the entire way, or you somehow jumped on the train at some point in the interim 20 years and you caught up in time for Coda. You're gonna get more out of it.
Oh, of course.
But you've never read a Star Trek novel in your life, but you're familiar with the characters who populate these novels. You know who Captain Picard is, and you know who Captain Sisko is, and that sort of thing. Then you're not coming in and getting lost. You're going to be able to pick up the narrative, because if we did our jobs correctly, you'll have everything you need as the story goes along.
You can only help so much. I mean, really, at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do. If someone's picking up this book and the only thing they know about Star Trek is Wrath of Khan and that one with the whales in it, well, then no, you're not going to understand this, and there's not really nothing we can do about it, because there's just way too much to have to, because you mentioned this character, but then you got to tell this story to back up the story you just said, and then you have to go here. It's like, okay, well wait a minute. Then before you know it, you're almost to the center of the earth with the rabbit hole you dug, because you're trying to give all this background info and background character, and you can't do that. You can't cater to every level of Star Trek viewership or readership.
I've been sitting here pondering how to succinctly put this. I guess I just updated the phrase. You can lead them to the stars, but you can't make them trek.
And I think that's a perfect end cap for the episode. Dayton, I want to thank you so much for giving us your time today. It has been truly enlightening to get your wisdom on this side of the Star Trek universe and its development, your participation in it. For the audience, check out Star Trek Coda Book 1, Moments Asunder. If you're listening to this right now, it is out today. And thank you for going boldly with Beyond Trek Podcast.
Hey, Dayton, if you have any socials that you want to share with us, this would be a great opportunity here. Tell people where to look you up or anything like that. If you're looking for additional commentary.
Yeah, you can find me at DaytonWard.com, and that'll have links to my blog and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and I think my Amazon author page is still on there, and basically just one-stop shopping for internet banality. That's me, DaytonWard.com.
Banality, great word.
Awesome.
Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
We are Beyond Trek Podcast. Lower your inhibitions and surrender your years. We will add inspirational and hilarious Trek content to your day. Your attention will adapt to subscribe to us. Resistance is futile.